I've come back to Port Arthur after nearly 14 years. And the first thing that throws me is how new the entrance feels. The visitor centre is bright and polished, almost too calm for what this place holds. 14 years ago, I remember arriving with the ruins already in my head. This time, it starts like a museum, quiet voices, clean glass, soft light. Then I step into the exhibition room, and there it is. A model of Port Arthur rebuilt as it once was. From above, it's almost beautiful. Complete buildings, neat streets, trees filling the gaps. It looks livable, like somewhere you could wake up to the sound of water and gulls and forget, for a second, what the name Port Arthur means. But that's the trap of the model. It brings back the ordinary. Because this place wasn't born as ruins. It was built to function, to house people, to organize them, to control them, day after day, year after year. My eyes drift to the model of the penitentiary, the giant spine of the whole settlement. But now it's stone and sky, stripped clean by time. And suddenly, Port Arthur stops feeling like history behind glass. It steps out into the open, and I'm standing right in front of it.
But there is a lot of history here. There is a lot of layers of history. We do like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land of the Paupers, and they will remain custodians. Norfolk Island officially closes its doors by 1857 or so. Send a lot of their prisoners on down to Hobart. Here, a lot of those men have actually built up 10, 20, 30 years and will remain in for another 10 or 20 years as well, prisoners. This place, yes, got the reputation as hell on earth, but of course Norfolk.
You can feel what she means by layers of history, and it matters that we begin with that acknowledgement. This is, and always was, Aboriginal land. But as you stand here, another layer rises up just as strongly. Port Arthur became the place men were sent when punishment had already failed. Not a single building, an entire system. And the structure in front of me now is its most visible spine. Port Arthur began as a timber station in 1830, and from 1833 to 1877 it became a destination for the most hardened secondary offenders, men who re-offended after arriving in Australia. Today it's part of the UNESCO Australian Convict Sites World Heritage Listing, because places like this show in stone and geography how the convict system was engineered and expanded. Now, the penitentiary. From a distance, people think of it as the prison at Port Arthur. But what's fascinating is that it didn't start as a prison at all. This building was originally constructed as a flour mill and granary in 1845, part of the settlement's push for self-sufficiency. Grain was milled using water power, and when the water wasn't enough, convicts were forced to walk on a treadmill to drive the machinery. A beautiful bay, a neat settlement, and somewhere inside this building, bodies being turned into power. The venture failed. The mill lay empty for years. And then pressure built again, because Port Arthur was holding more and more men. Between 1854 and 1857, the old mill and granary were converted into the penitentiary, transforming an industrial building into a massive holding block. First a machine for production, and then a machine for confinement. As I walk the outside, what hits me is the repetition. Rows of windows, stacked and aligned, like the building is counting people for you. The scale isn't subtle, It's meant to dominate the settlement and to be seen from a distance. Even today, it pulls your eye the way it must have pulled everyone's attention back then. The penitentiary housed prisoners until the settlement closed in 1877. The details you see now, the open stairways, the long interior lines, the empty window frames, they don't just look dramatic. They expose how the place functioned. Containment at scale, routines repeated day after day, and a building designed to make that kind of life feel normal. The stone, the ironwork, the geometry of the openings. Because ruins do something a complete building can't. They strip away the museum feeling and leave you with the structure, the bones of a system. And then there's the third layer, what time did to it. In 1897, a fire devastated the penitentiary, leaving the masonry walls and the barred windows behind. The shell we recognize today. That's why the building feels like it's half present and half missing, not fully collapsed, not fully intact, suspended between what it was and what remains. When I step back outside and look up again, I keep thinking about the contrast: water, wind, green hills, a postcard landscape. And right in the middle of it, this enormous, broken grid of stone, still doing what it was built to do, holding your gaze. Because in the end, the penitentiary isn't only a landmark, it's Port Arthur's message made physical. A place built to function, built to endure, and built to be remembered.
Where the motor inn sits up on the top of the site there, that was originally Port Arthur property. Started site in 1960, which is, for a young country, had a 9 tails punishment. That was abolished by the late 1840s with the Quakers. This is where this separate prison originally started. Then it went over to Europe, to Pentonville, that was modelled here.
I have to be honest, this is the saddest part of Port Arthur for me. We're starting here at the Asylum, a place that marks Port Arthur's later welfare phase. By the 1860s, many prisoners were aging or unwell, and the site expanded beyond punishment to managing decline. With the Paupers Depot, 1863 to 64, followed by the Asylum, 1864 to 68. Just nearby is the separate prison built around a different idea of control. By the late 1840s, authorities increasingly experimented with isolation and enforced silence, punishment designed to break the mind, not just the body. It's not only the ruins that get to you, it's the sequence. A system that isolates people and then has to deal with what that isolation leaves behind. Alright, I'll let the on-site guide take it from here.
Take 100 lashes without uttering a single cry. Now, I'll be honest with you, I find that entirely impossible to believe, but those prisoners were known as pebbles. Small, hard to break, hard to crush. A pebble in the shoe of the authority. And they were given by the other convicts a very high status in the prison hierarchy. And even today, if you go to a prison, there are hierarchies. Others scream out after a lash or two. They're known as sandstone and easily worked stone. And thereby the other convicts given little regard. So they opened up this prison in 1849, the new way to punish. Instead of the corporal punishment, it's more psychological punishment in here. You'd be brought in, it is the third of its type in the entire world, First Eastern State Penitentiary opens in 1829 in the United States outside of Philadelphia. Second one, Pentonville Prison, opens in London in 1842. And just 7 years after that, this one opens. It is the first in Australia, and it is the third in the world. The craziest one that I've ever seen is what's called the Isle of the Pines in Cuba. There is a central tower that the guards reside in, and they look straight through the prisoner's cell to the outside. And there are 5 floors. It's a circular building, so they can look right straight through your cell every hour of every day. And that's the idea behind it. From that central location, one guard could mine A, B, and C wing from that one location. Now, your name, sir, is? Yeah.
Daniel.
What's that?
Daniel.
Daniel. Daniel, you're no longer Daniel. No, you're number 10. Into the cell number 10, and I will lock the door behind you. Now, he is no longer number 10. He'd be washed from head to toe, shave his head, shave his face, and they take away his name, giving a badge number with the number of his cell. He is encouraged to do quiet activities like broom making, shoe making, tailoring, or book binding. 1 hour a day, he is allowed out of his cell, and he has to pull a leather or felt mask over his face with 2 eye slits. Now, if I'm scrubbing the floor here, and he is walking out to a cell, I have to turn my face to the wall like that. You are not going to walk. You start walking, you keep walking until he tells you to stop, which is number 10, 1 hour exactly. This is to be a silent prison, silent for the 4 to 12 months that you're in here. You're not to stay 30 days in the dark on bread and water. Now there are 2 1-meter thick rock walls where no one could hear you screaming, and 4 doors that include every little bit of light, and you'd be in that dark cell for 2 to 30 days.
Just across the creek from the asylum are the low walls of the Paupers Mess, and for me this is one of the quietest gut punches on the whole site. By the 1860s, Port Arthur was changing. Transportation had ended, the convict industries were winding down, and the settlement entered what historians often call its welfare phase. The population was aging, increasingly infirm, and the place that once ran on labour began to resemble an institution for men who could no longer work. The Paupers Depot was built in 1863 to 64, and in 1864 this mess building became the daily gathering point, a place where ex-convicts, now classified as invalids and paupers, came for meals and routine. Look at what survives. Not grand rooms, not imposing towers, just walls, outlines and open air. And that fits the story. The terror of Port Arthur is often told through the big structures. The penitentiary, the separate prison. But the Paupers Mess tells you what came after the punishment. The slow ending. It's easy to imagine how this space would have felt in the 1860s. The shuffle of tired feet, the scrape of bowls, the same faces returning day after day, men who had already given decades to the system and now were simply being managed. Standing here, the ruins don't feel dramatic. They feel resigned, and somehow that makes them even harder to leave. Just up here is the Convict water supply trail, a reminder that Port Arthur wasn't only built with prisons, but with infrastructure. In 1842, convicts worked on an ambitious hydro-engineering project meant to bring reliable water to the settlement and support industry, including flour production. Today it's a 600-meter self-guided walk, where you can still spot surviving traces of that system in the landscape. It's not the most dramatic ruin on the map, but it tells the bigger story. Port Arthur had to function like a town, and even water became part of the convict machine. Up on the slope, away from the main ruins, there's a small cottage that looks almost gentle. And that contrast is exactly why it stays in your head. This is known as Smith O'Brien's cottage. It's remembered for housing one of Port Arthur's best-known political prisoners, William Smith O'Brien, an Irish nationalist leader from the Young Ireland movement. Sentenced for high treason after the 1848 uprising, he was transported to Van Diemen's Land and later spent time here at Port Arthur. The guidebooks and audio stories often use this cottage to represent a different category of prisoner.
I ought to take my place among the most humble and the most afflicted of these, my fellow prisoners.
Not the usual convict labour force, but a small number of political prisoners who were kept separately and whose stories were treated differently within the system. And look at where it sits, close to the officers' area, physically separated from the convict compound. A reminder that even imprisonment had a hierarchy, and space itself was part of control. It's a quiet building on a quiet hill, but it carries a loud idea. Port Arthur wasn't one story, it was many, and some were meant to be remembered. Now we're heading downhill to the hospital ruins, one of the places at Port Arthur that feels quieter than the big landmarks, but somehow heavier. By the early 1840s, this settlement had grown fast. The convict population here had reached over 1,100, and in 1842, Port Arthur began major new construction, including both the huge mill and granary project and the building of a hospital. It's easy to forget that a penal station still needed an entire medical world. Injuries from hard labour, chronic illness, punishments that went wrong, outbreaks, and the slow wear of a life built around rations, cold, and control. Standing among these remains, you can imagine the contradictions. A place meant for care, but inside a system designed for discipline. Relief and suffering would have lived side by side. Treatment, confinement, and the constant reminder that even illness didn't remove you from the rules. And then there's what happened after the convict era. When Port Arthur closed, the site didn't simply freeze in time. People moved in, the area shifted into a township, and the old buildings took on new lives, until fire tore through what was left. In the 1890s, devastating fires swept the area, and in 1895 and 1897, many of the major buildings, including the hospital, were destroyed or badly damaged. So what you're looking at now isn't just a ruin, it's the visible edge of several histories layered on top of each other. The convict station, the later township, and the aftermath that turned solid buildings into broken walls. And maybe that's why the hospital ruins hit differently, because in a place built around punishment, this was where the system had to admit one simple truth: bodies fail, even here. These are the officers' quarters, and they're a reminder that Port Arthur wasn't only a prison, it was a working community built around authority. You can almost read the hierarchy in the geography: higher ground, cleaner lines, more privacy. A different life running parallel to the convict world below. It's easy to focus on cells and punishment, but places like this show the other side of the system. routine, status, and people whose job was to keep the whole machine moving, day after day. And then there's the Commandant's house, the most domestic-looking building in this landscape, and maybe one of the most unsettling because of it. This was the center of command, where decisions were made, reports were read, and the settlement's rules became real. From here, you could look out across the bay and the buildings and see a place that might resemble a town, but it wasn't a town. It was a system designed to control space, movement, and time. Standing outside this house, the contrast hits hard. A home at the heart of an institution. As we pass the guard tower and the law courts, the message becomes obvious. Port Arthur didn't rely on one wall, it relied on layers. Watch, record, report. Rules written on paper, turning into consequences in stone. Now that we've walked through the ruins on land, it's time for one of the best parts of the ticket. The complimentary harbour cruise included with entry. It's a short loop, about 25 minutes, but it gives you the clearest sense that Port Arthur was never just one prison building. Out here on the water, everything looks calm. Soft hills, quiet bays, and the settlement sitting back from the shoreline. But this view reveals the logic of the place. Distance used as a tool. Water becomes a boundary. And the sites we're about to pass, the Isle of the Dead and Point Puer, show two ends of the same system, where lives were controlled and where many were finally laid to rest. First, we glide toward a small island with a heavy name, the Isle of the Dead. From 1833 to 1877, this island served as the burial ground for people connected with the Port Arthur settlement, convicts, soldiers, staff, and families. It's a strange feeling seeing it this close to the main site. The crossing is short, just a few minutes. Yet it marks a complete separation. There were around 1,000 burials here, but only a portion were marked with headstones. That detail matters because it tells you something about how memory worked in a place like this. Some were remembered by name, while many simply disappeared into the ground, recorded in ledgers, not in stone. As the boat eases past, it's hard not to picture the quiet routines that would have played out on this water. A small boat leaving the jetty, the shoreline shrinking behind, and an island that became the final destination for people who never truly had choices. From the cemetery island, the view naturally pulls across the bay to Point Puer, the separate institution for boys. Point Puer operated as a boys' prison in the Port Arthur system and is widely described as the first juvenile prison in the British Empire. Over time, more than 3,000 boys are recorded as having been held there. From the water, it doesn't look like a prison, it's just a point of land, quiet, green, distant. But that's the trick of Port Arthur. Places that look peaceful can carry the heaviest stories. This separation was deliberate. The boys were kept away from the adult convict population, part of an early attempt at reform, at least in theory. But distance doesn't automatically mean mercy. And when you remember that this is a landscape designed for control, that calm shoreline starts to feel less like scenery and more like a boundary. If you've ever wondered why this short cruise is included with entry, it's because it connects the main ruins to the wider system. On land, Port Arthur can feel like a set of buildings. From the water, it becomes a network. And Point Puer is one of the clearest reminders of that. As we loop back toward the jetty, the main settlement comes back into view. And it looks different now. In just 20-odd minutes, this harbour has shown two truths side by side. A place where thousands lived under a system of punishment, and a small island where so many were buried, often without a marker. And that's the strange power of this cruise. The water is beautiful, the air is clean, the scenery is almost too calm, but the stories beneath it are anything but. After all the stone and shadow, the beautiful gardens inside Port Arthur feel almost unreal. Soft paths, open light, and this quiet sense that the place is trying to breathe again. It's such a strange contrast. A space designed to look calm and civilized, sitting inside a landscape built for control. Walking here now, you can almost feel the sight shift. From noise to silence, from routine to memory. And then, as I look back across the grounds, the penitentiary comes back into view, not in close-up detail, just its full outline against the sky. Even from a distance it still dominates, like the final word in the story. So that's Port Arthur. A place of layers you can see and layers you can only feel. Thanks for coming with me until next time.